The crimson glow of Earth's burning atmosphere painted Admiral Rebecca Torres's weathered face as she stood on the bridge of the battlecruiser Defiance, watching humanity's birth world die before her eyes. The hegemony's assault fleet had arrived without warning 3 hours ago, their sleek obsidian vessels emerging from hyperspace like harbingers of extinction. And within minutes the orbital defense platforms that had protected Earth for 2 centuries were nothing more than expanding clouds of superheated debris. Rebecca's knuckles were white as she gripped the command rail, forcing herself to watch as lance after lance of coherent energy carved through the atmosphere, turning cities into glass and oceans into steam. The communication array crackled with desperate transmissions from the surface, voices of billions crying out in terror and confusion as her world was systematically reduced to a molten wasteland. But there was nothing she'd do except bear witness to humanity's darkest hour. The tactical display showed the devastating reality of their situation with cold, mathematical precision. The hegemony had brought nearly 3,000 vessels of various classes, from massive dreadnoughts bristling with weapons to swift corvettes that darted between Earth's dying defense fleet like metallic sharks. Humanity's combined forces barely numbered 400 ships, and most of those were already crippled or destroyed, their hulks spinning slowly through space as emergency beacons transmitted the coordinates of escape pods that would likely never be recovered. Rebecca had commanded fleets in 3 previous wars, had seen the worst that the galaxy could throw at humanity, but nothing had prepared her for the sheer overwhelming force that the alien coalition had brought to bear against them. The hegemony's leader, a crystalline entity called the Prime Architect, had declared humanity a galactic infection that needed to be surgically removed, and it seemed they possessed both the will and the means to carry out that genocidal promise. A urgent transmission from Earth's surface broke through the chaos of battle communications, the voice of President Amanda Foster crackling through layers of interference as she spoke from some underground bunker deep beneath what had once been Washington. The president's words were clipped and professional despite the circumstances, outlining the activation of Protocol 7, humanity's most desperate contingency plan that would scatter the surviving population across dozens of hidden colonies and generation ships that had been secretly prepared for exactly this scenario. Rebecca felt a mixture of pride and heartbreak as she listened to Foster's final presidential address, knowing that the woman was likely speaking her last words to a species that might not survive the next 24 hours. The evacuation ships were already lifting off from concealed launch sites around the globe, packed with whatever remnants of human civilization they could carry, racing against time to escape the planet's gravity well before the hegemony's bombardment made such escape impossible. The bridge shuddered as enemy fire found its mark, and Rebecca watched her damage control officer struggle to keep the Defiance operational while coordinating the retreat of what remained of the Third Fleet. Commander Jake Morrison's voice came through from the heavy cruiser Resilient, reporting that his squadron had successfully covered the evacuation of the lunar colonies but had lost half their ships in the process. Rebecca authorized a general retreat, knowing that every minute they delayed here meant more human lives lost. But the decision felt like a knife twisting in her chest as she ordered the abandonment of humanity's homeworld. The surviving ships began their desperate jump to hyperspace, carrying with them not just the physical remnants of human civilization, but also the terrible knowledge that they were now a species without a home, refugees fleeing into the vast darkness of a galaxy that had suddenly become their enemy. As the Defiance entered hyperspace and Earth vanished behind them, Rebecca Torres made a silent vow that this would not be the end of humanity's story, even as the overwhelming evidence suggested that the hegemony had just witnessed the final chapter of human existence. 3 months had passed since the fall of Earth, and Commander Jake Morrison found himself leading a desperate convoy of survivors through the treacherous Kepler asteroid field, where jagged rocks the size of city blocks provided the only cover humanity had left in a galaxy that seemed determined to erase them from existence. His flagship, the battle-scarred heavy cruiser Resilient, led a motley collection of 37 vessels that represented all that remained of the once mighty Terran colonial fleet's 7th Squadron, a mix of military ships, converted cargo haulers, passenger liners, and mining vessels that had been pressed into service as humanity's last mobile stronghold. The civilian ships were packed beyond capacity with refugees who had managed to escape the systematic destruction of the outer colonies, families huddled in cargo bays and engineering sections, their faces bearing the hollow look of people who had lost everything but refused to surrender to despair. Jake stood in the cramped command center of the Resilient, studying sensor readings that showed the ever-present threat of hegemony hunter-killer squadrons that prowled the shipping lanes like apex predators, methodically searching every asteroid field, nebula, and dead system where human survivors might be hiding. The hegemony's efficiency in hunting down the scattered remnants of humanity was both terrifying and grimly impressive. Their advanced sensor technology capable of detecting the faintest energy signatures from human ships, even when they powered down to minimal life support. Captain Nicole Hayes, Jake's chief intelligence officer, had compiled disturbing reports from a few refugees who had witnessed other survivor groups being discovered and eliminated, describing how the alien coalition ships would appear without warning and unleash devastating firepower that left nothing but expanding debris fields where human hopes had once flourished. The psychological warfare was equally brutal, as the hegemony broadcast continuous propaganda throughout human space, declaring that resistance was futile and promising swift death to those who surrendered versus prolonged suffering for those who continued to flee. Jake had forbidden his communications officers from playing these transmissions over the ship's internal speakers, but he knew that many of his crew had heard them during maintenance duties, and he could see the growing desperation in their eyes as each day brought news of another human outpost discovered and destroyed. Despite the overwhelming odds, Jake maintained strict discipline and operational protocols that kept his makeshift fleet functioning as a cohesive unit, organizing regular training exercises, supply redistributions, and morale-building activities that reminded everyone they were still fighting for something greater than mere survival. Dr. Patricia Williams, the fleet's chief medical officer, had established mobile clinics that moved between ships, treating not just physical injuries, but also the psychological trauma that threatened to break the spirit of the survivors, while Chief Engineer Robert Davis worked miracles, keeping their disparate collection of vessels operational despite the constant strain of running silent and the impossibility of obtaining proper replacement parts. The children aboard the ships had adapted with remarkable resilience, turning the cargo bays into playgrounds and the observation decks into classrooms, where volunteer teachers continued their education despite the uncertainty of their future, their laughter providing a precious reminder of what humanity was fighting to preserve. The most dangerous moments came during the necessary supply runs to abandoned stations and dead worlds, where Jake's teams had to risk exposure to gather the food, fuel, and medical supplies that kept their small civilization alive. Lieutenant Colonel Maria Rodriguez led these desperate missions with surgical precision, her special operations team slipping past hegemony patrols to raid forgotten supply depots and evacuation caches, always racing against time before enemy sensors could lock onto their position. During one particularly harrowing encounter near the ruins of New Geneva Colony, Jake's fleet had been forced to scatter across 3 different star systems when a hegemony heavy cruiser detected their presence, and had taken 2 weeks of careful coordination through encrypted burst transmissions to reunite the scattered vessels at their predetermined rally point in the Proxima Nebula. Yet even in their darkest moments, when food supplies ran low and the constant stress of being hunted began to take its toll, Jake noticed something remarkable about the human survivors under his protection. They had begun to adapt and evolve their tactics with creativity that seemed to catch the hegemony forces off guard, developing new methods of sensor masking, creating improvised weapons from mining equipment, and establishing communication networks that allowed different survivor groups to share intelligence and coordinate their movements. Sergeant First Class Kevin Thompson, a former colonial marine turned logistics coordinator, had organized the civilians into efficient work crews that could break down and reassemble essential equipment in minutes, while former corporate executive Jennifer Walsh had established a complex bartering system that ensured critical resources reached the ships that needed them most. As Jake watched his people transform from terrified refugees into hardened survivors, he began to suspect that the hegemony might have underestimated humanity's greatest strength: their ability to adapt, overcome, and unite in the face of seemingly impossible odds, a realization that would prove to be the foundation of everything that was to come. Dr. Elena Rodriguez never expected that her xenoarchaeology expertise would become humanity's last hope for survival, but as she stood before the massive crystalline structure buried deep within the asteroid designated Sigma 7, she realized that the ancient precursor ruins they had stumbled upon might hold the key to turning the tide against the hegemony's relentless extermination campaign. The discovery had been purely accidental, occurring when Chief Engineer Robert Davis detected unusual energy readings while his salvage team searched for usable materials in what appeared to be nothing more than a barren rock drifting to the Veil Nebula. But the moment Elena's survey team breached the outer shell of the asteroid, they found themselves staring at technology that predated known galactic civilization by millions of years. The chamber stretched for kilometers in every direction, its walls covered in intricate patterns that seemed to shift and flow like living circuits, while towering spires of an unknown crystalline material pulsed with a soft blue light that somehow felt both alien and strangely familiar to human explorers who had entered this ancient sanctuary. Commander Jake Morrison had initially been skeptical when Elena requested permission to conduct a full archaeological survey of the site, knowing that every moment they remained stationary increased the risk of detection by hegemony hunter squadrons. But the preliminary scans had revealed energy signatures unlike anything in the known databases, suggesting that whatever precursors had built here was still functional after eons of abandonment. Elena's team worked with desperate efficiency, documenting the alien hieroglyphs and attempting to understand the purpose of the various technological artifacts scattered throughout the chamber, while Marine security teams maintained a perimeter watch for any sign of approaching enemy vessels. What they discovered during those first few hours defied everything humanity thought they knew about galactic history, as Elena realized that the precursor civilization had not simply vanished, as most xenohistorians believed, but had instead transcended physical existence and left behind a vast network of dormant installations waiting for the right species to activate them. The breakthrough came when Elena noticed that the crystalline structures responded differently to human proximity than they did to the presence of other alien refugees who had joined their convoy, specifically a small group of Aldari engineers who had defected from the hegemony after witnessing the massacre of a peaceful mining colony. While the alien refugees triggered no response from the precursor technology, human contact caused the crystals to glow brighter and emit harmonic frequencies that seemed to resonate with something deep in human neural patterns, suggesting that the ancient builders had somehow anticipated humanity's eventual discovery of their installations. Dr. Patricia Williams, who had accompanied the survey team to study any potential biological hazards, detected unprecedented neural activity in human subjects who made direct contact with the crystalline interfaces, as if the technology was attempting to establish some form of communication or data transfer that bypassed conventional sensory channels entirely. Elena volunteered to serve as a primary test subject for the first attempted interface with the precursor systems, despite the obvious dangers of connecting human consciousness to alien technology that had remained dormant for millennia. The procedure required her to place her hands directly on the largest crystal formation while maintaining a meditative state that would allow the ancient systems to establish a neural link. But as a connection formed, Elena experienced a flood of information that nearly overwhelmed her human mind with visions of galactic-scale engineering projects, weapon systems capable of reshaping solar systems, and most importantly, detailed schematics for defensive technologies that could render human ships invisible to conventional sensors. The knowledge transfer was accompanied by intense physical pain as her nervous system struggled to process data streams designed for a species with fundamentally different neural architecture. But Elena forced herself to endure the ordeal long enough to download critical information about precursor weapon systems and defensive measures that could give humanity a fighting chance against the hegemony's overwhelming technological superiority. When Elena finally collapsed from a neural strain, her mind filled with alien memories and technical specifications that would take months to fully understand, she had fundamentally changed the trajectory of humanity's war for survival. The preliminary data she had absorbed revealed that the precursors had faced their own extinction-level threat eons ago and had developed countermeasures specifically designed to combat species that sought to dominate and control other civilizations through superior firepower and technological intimidation. The ancient installations scattered throughout the galaxy were not merely archaeological curiosities, but rather a sophisticated early warning and defense network that could be activated by species deemed worthy of inheriting Precursor's legacy, and the criteria for worthiness seemed to include the very qualities that had allowed humanity to survive their first encounters with the hegemony: adaptability, creativity, and an unwillingness to surrender in the face of overwhelming odds. As Elena recovered from the interface procedure, her memories now permanently altered by the presence of precursor knowledge that felt both foreign and somehow natural within her human consciousness. She began to understand that humanity's unique neural structure allowed them to serve as living conduits for the ancient technology in ways that other galactic species simply could not replicate. The implications were staggering. suggesting that humanity had not been randomly selected for extinction by the hegemony, but rather targeted specifically because some faction within the alien coalition understood the potential threat that humans represented to their plans for galactic domination, making the war for human survival simultaneously a battle for the future of all free civilizations throughout the galaxy. Part 4 *. Captain Marcus Thompson stood on the bridge of the newly retrofitted destroyer Phoenix Rising, watching as his engineering teams completed the final installation of the revolutionary precursor weapon systems that Dr. Elena Rodriguez had helped him reverse engineer from the ancient alien technology. Knowing that the next few hours would either mark humanity's first meaningful victory against the hegemony or result in a complete annihilation of their most experienced combat personnel in a desperate gamble that could end the resistance before it truly began. The weapon systems were unlike anything in human military doctrine, operating on principles that seemed to bend the fundamental laws of physics by creating localized distortions in space-time that could penetrate even the most advanced defensive shields. But the technology demanded an enormous price from its operators, requiring direct neural interface with the precursor crystals that caused excruciating pain and potentially permanent neurological damage to the human volunteers who served as living conduits for the ancient weapons. Marcus had personally volunteered to serve as the primary weapons operator despite protests from Commander Jake Morrison and Admiral Rebecca Torres, arguing that as the most experienced combat pilot in the remaining fleet, he had the best chance of successfully targeting the hegemony vessels while maintaining precise mental discipline required to channel the alien technology without losing his sanity in the process. The target for humanity's first counterattack was a hegemony supply convoy that intelligence reports indicated would be passing through the Arcturus system with minimal escort, carrying advanced weapon components and rare materials needed for the alien coalition's continued expansion throughout former human space. Lieutenant Colonel Maria Rodriguez had spent weeks gathering intelligence on the convoy's route and security protocols, infiltrating abandoned monitoring stations and intercepting encrypted communications that revealed the hegemony's growing confidence in their ability to operate freely throughout the galaxy without fear of human retaliation. The convoy consisted of 12 heavily armored transport vessels protected by only 4 escort cruisers, a level of security that would have been considered adequate against conventional human weapons, but which Marcus hoped would prove insufficient against the reality-warping capabilities of precursor technology that the hegemony had never encountered in active combat. As the Phoenix Rising and her 2 escort vessels approached the convoy's projected position, using the advanced stealth systems that Elena's team had developed from precursor defensive technology, Marcus felt a familiar burning sensation as the alien neural interface established its connection with his nervous system, flooding his consciousness with tactical data and weapon targeting solutions that appeared directly in his mind rather than on conventional display screens. The sensation was indescribable, like having another person's thoughts overlaid on his own consciousness, as the precursor systems provided him with 3-dimensional visualizations of space-time itself, showing the gravitational fields and quantum fluctuations that conventional sensors could never detect. Chief Weapons Officer Timothy Brooks monitored Marcus's vital signs from the adjacent station, ready to forcibly disconnect a neural link if the strain became too dangerous, while communications specialist Angela Davis maintained encrypted contact with the other ships in their small strike force to coordinate the precisely timed attack that would determine whether humanity remained a viable threat to hegemony expansion. The moment of truth came when the hegemony convoy dropped out of hyperspace, exactly where intelligence had predicted. Their massive transport vessels emerging from the swirling vortex of interdimensional travel with the casual confidence of predators who believe themselves to be the apex species in a galaxy that belonged to them by right of superior firepower. Marcus felt the precursor weapon systems reach full readiness as exotic energy built up within the crystalline focusing arrays, and he directed the first shot at the convoy's lead escort cruiser, watching in amazement as a brilliant beam of coherent space-time distortion tore through the alien vessel shields as if they were made of paper and reduced the ship's hull to its component atoms in less than 3 seconds. The hegemony's response was immediate and panicked, their remaining escort vessels attempting to form a defensive formation while transmitting desperate distress calls that would bring reinforcements within hours. But the alien crews had no experience fighting an enemy that could ignore their most advanced defensive technologies and strike at them from impossible angles using weapons that operated outside conventional physics. The battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded galactic history, as Marcus and his fellow precursor weapon operators systematically dismantled the hegemony convoy with surgical precision, their reality-warping beams carving through enemy hulls and overloading alien power systems with an efficiency that bordered on the supernatural. The transport vessels, loaded with advanced technology and strategic materials, exploded in brilliant fireballs that lit up the Arcturus system like premature stars, while the surviving escort cruisers found themselves helpless against weapons that could strike from multiple dimensions simultaneously. Within 20 minutes, the entire hegemony convoy had been reduced to expanding clouds of superheated debris, and humanity had achieved its first significant military victory since the fall of Earth, proving that the alien coalition was not invincible and that human ingenuity combined with precursor technology could level the playing field in ways that the hegemony strategic planners had never considered possible. But the victory came at a devastating cost that Marcus felt in every fiber of his being as the neural interface finally disconnected, leaving him convulsing on the bridge deck as his nervous system struggled to cope with the alien energies that had flowed through his consciousness during the battle. Dr. Patricia Williams and her medical team rushed to stabilize him and the other weapon operators, but the damage was already done, as prolonged exposure of precursor technology had burned out significant portions of their neural pathways, leaving them with permanent cognitive impairment and chronic pain that would plague them for the rest of their lives. As Marcus drifted in and out of consciousness, he realized that humanity had discovered a weapon that could defeat the hegemony, but using it would require soldiers willing to sacrifice not just their lives, but their very minds for the chance to strike back at their oppressors, a terrible price that would test the limits of human courage and determination in the battles yet to come. Part 5 *. Ambassador Lisa Carter had never imagined that her diplomatic career would involve conducting clandestine meetings in the cargo holds of abandoned space stations. But as she sat across from the towering insectoid figure of Hive Speaker Zeph Kaler in the dimly lit confines of Outpost Meridian, she realized that traditional diplomacy had died along with Earth and been reborn as something far more dangerous and desperate. The Vorthak delegation had risked everything to make contact with the human resistance, traveling through 3 different star systems while evading hegemony patrols that would have executed them immediately for the crime of unauthorized communication with the galactic infection that humanity represented according to official coalition propaganda. Zeph Kaler's compound eyes reflected the emergency lighting as the alien diplomat explained in carefully modulated tones that the Vorthak collective had never willingly joined the hegemony, but had been conquered and absorbed after their homeworld was devastated by the same reality-warping weapons that the Coalition now used to maintain control over dozens of subjugated species throughout their expanding empire. The revelation that many of the alien races fighting under hegemony banners were actually unwilling conscripts rather than willing allies fundamentally changed Lisa's understanding of the galactic political situation, suggesting that humanity's war for survival was part of a much larger struggle between freedom and tyranny that had been raging across the galaxy for centuries. As Zeph Kaler shared intelligence about the internal structure of the hegemony, Lisa learned that the coalition was actually controlled by a small council of 3 ancient species who had achieved technological supremacy through the systematic exploitation and enslavement of younger civilizations, using a combination of overwhelming firepower and psychological manipulation to force entire star systems into submission. The crystalline hierarchs, the void-touched, and the eternal throne maintained their dominance by playing their subject species against each other, creating artificial rivalries and dependencies that prevented any unified resistance from forming, while promising limited autonomy and technological advancement to those who proved their loyalty through acts of conquest against newly discovered civilizations. Through a carefully constructed network of encrypted communications and clandestine meetings, Lisa began reaching out to other oppressed species within hegemony space, discovering a vast underground movement of beings who secretly yearned for liberation but lacked the military capability to challenge their overlords directly. The Karathi, a proud warrior culture reduced to serving as shock troops for hegemony expansion, sent messages through black market smuggling networks expressing their desire to reclaim their ancestral honor by fighting alongside humans who had proven capable of inflicting real damage on the coalition's forces. The ethereal symbiotes, Energy beings who had been forced to power hegemony weapon systems against their will offered to sabotage critical infrastructure in exchange for human assistance in establishing safe havens where their people could exist without being enslaved as living batteries for alien war machines. Perhaps most valuable was the intelligence provided by Dr. Cale Thorne, a human xenolinguist who had been working with the Resistance's intelligence division to decode intercepted hegemony communications, revealing that many of the Coalition's member species were beginning to question the official narrative about humanity's supposed threat to galactic stability. The alien propaganda machine had portrayed humans as violent expansionists who sought to dominate other species through military force, but the reality of human behavior during their desperate flight from Earth told a very different story, as refugee convoys had repeatedly risked their own safety to rescue alien civilians caught in hegemony crossfire, and human medical teams had provided aid to wounded aliens without regard for species or political affiliation. These acts of unexpected compassion had not gone unnoticed by the oppressed populations within hegemony space, many of whom had begun to realize that their supposed liberators bore far more resemblance to tyrannical overlords they had been told to fear than did the humans they were supposed to help eliminate. Building this underground resistance network required unprecedented levels of operational security and creative problem-solving, as Lisa and her team had to establish communication protocols that could evade the hegemony's sophisticated surveillance systems while coordinating the activities of dozens of different species with incompatible technologies and conflicting cultural values. Captain Nicole Hayes, who had transitioned from intelligence analysis to covert operations, developed ingenious methods for smuggling human agents into hegemony space disguised as alien refugees or merchant crew members, while communications specialist Jennifer Walsh created quantum-encrypted messaging systems that could pass information through seemingly innocent commercial transactions and scientific data exchanges. The resistance cells were organized using principles that Lisa had learned from studying historical human rebellions, with each group knowing only enough about the overall network to accomplish their specific missions, while remaining unable to compromise the entire operation if captured by hegemony security forces. The psychological impact of this growing alliance was immeasurable for human morale, as survivors who had spent months believing they were alone against an entire galaxy began to realize that they were actually part of a much larger community of beings who shared their commitment to freedom and self-determination. Chief Engineer Robert Davis worked around the clock to modify human technologies for use by alien resistance members, while former corporate negotiator Michael Anderson used his business expertise to establish supply chains that could move weapons, medical supplies, and strategic intelligence between resistance cells without detection by hegemony monitoring systems. As reports began flowing in from across the galaxy, describing successful sabotage operations, prison breaks, and intelligence-gathering missions conducted by this new multi-species alliance, Lisa realized that humanity had inadvertently become the catalyst for the largest organized rebellion in galactic history, transforming their desperate fight for survival into a war of liberation that could reshape the balance of power throughout the known universe. Part 6 *. General David Hayes stood in the primary command center aboard the massive converted mining platform Liberation's Dawn, coordinating what would later be known as the Great Liberation, the largest and most complex military operation in human history, as simultaneous strikes erupted across 47 different star systems in a carefully orchestrated campaign designed to shatter the hegemony's control over their enslaved territories and ignite the flames of rebellion throughout the galaxy. The operation had taken 8 months of meticulous planning and coordination between human resistance cells and their alien allies, requiring unprecedented levels of cooperation between species who had never worked together before. As Lisa Carter's diplomatic network had grown into a vast underground alliance that included over 60 different civilizations, all united by their shared desire to break free from hegemony's tyrannical rule. Hayes had earned his position through a combination of tactical brilliance and a unique human ability to inspire multi-species cooperation, having successfully commanded 3 previous operations that had liberated entire star systems from hegemony control. But nothing had prepared him for the sheer scope and complexity of managing a galactic-scale military campaign that required split-second timing across distances measured in hundreds of light years. The first wave of attacks began exactly as planned, with human-led strike teams using precursor technology to disable key hegemony infrastructure, while their alien allies launched diversionary attacks that drew enemy forces away from critical targets, allowing resistance fighters to seize control of communication networks, weapon depots, and administrative centers across dozens of worlds simultaneously. Commander Jake Morrison led the assault on the heavily fortified hegemony stronghold at Vega Prime, where his combined human Vorthack fleet used revolutionary new tactics that combined precursor weapons with conventional firepower to overwhelm the enemy's defensive systems, while Captain Marcus Thompson, still recovering from his previous neural interface injuries, but refusing to sit out the most important battle of his life, coordinated the liberation of the Karathi homeworld where an entire generation of warrior poets had been enslaved as shock troops for hegemony expansion. The precision and coordination of these attacks caught the hegemony leadership completely off guard, as their intelligence networks had failed to detect the true extent of the growing rebellion. And for the first time since the conquest began centuries ago, coalition forces found themselves fighting defensive battles on multiple fronts, while their subject species rose up in open revolt. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had worked tirelessly to develop new applications for precursor technology that could be used by non-human operators, creating hybrid weapon systems that allowed Vorthack hive minds to interface with ancient alien crystals and enabling Karathi warriors to channel reality warping energies through their traditional blade weapons, transforming individual resistance fighters into forces capable of challenging entire hegemony garrison units. The psychological impact of these early victories was enormous, as news of successful liberation operations spread through underground networks across the galaxy, inspiring previously passive populations to take up arms against their oppressors and demonstrating that the hegemony's technological superiority was not absolute when faced with the combined creativity and determination of multiple species working together toward a common goal. Chief Engineer Robert Davis had established mobile manufacturing facilities that could produce precursor-enhanced weapons and equipment in asteroid fields and hidden bases, ensuring that the growing rebellion would have access to the advanced technology needed to challenge the coalition's military supremacy. However, the hegemony's response to the Great Liberation was swift, brutal, and far more devastating than even the most pessimistic human strategists had anticipated, as the coalition's ruling council decided that maintaining control required making examples that would terrify any other species considering rebellion against their authority. The Eternal Throne deployed their most advanced weapon systems, reality-sharing devices that could collapse entire star systems into dimensional voids, while crystalline hierarchs unleashed swarms of self-replicating hunter-killer probes that began systematically hunting down and exterminating every human and alien resistance member they could locate. The Void touched, perhaps the most terrifying of the hegemony's ruling species, began using their mastery of dark energy to literally erase rebellious worlds from existence, removing them from space-time itself so completely that no trace remained of the billions of beings who had dared to challenge coalition rule. The turning point came when hegemony forces launched a coordinated counterattack against the liberated worlds, using weapons of such devastating power that they threatened to destabilize the fundamental structure of local space-time, creating cascading effects that could potentially destroy entire sectors of the galaxy and kill trillions of innocent beings regardless of their political allegiances. General Hayes watched in horror as reports flooded in from across the battlefront, describing how the coalition's response had transformed what should have been humanity's greatest triumph into a desperate struggle for survival that made their original flight from Earth seem like a minor skirmish by comparison. The hegemony had revealed the true extent of their power, demonstrating that they possessed weapons capable of rewriting the laws of physics on a galactic scale, and Hayes realized that the rebellion had pushed their enemies past the point of rational response into a genocidal fury that threatened to consume everything in its path. As emergency evacuation orders went out to resistance cells across the galaxy, and human commanders tried desperately to salvage what they could from the wreckage of their carefully planned offensive, Hayes understood that the Great Liberation had succeeded in one crucial way. It had forced the hegemony to reveal their true nature as beings willing to destroy entire civilizations rather than accept any challenge to their absolute dominion, a revelation that would ultimately unite every free species in the galaxy against their common enemy. Part 7 ***. Admiral Rebecca Torres had always believed that humanity's greatest strength lay not in their individual capabilities, but in their collective ability to adapt and evolve under pressure. But even she was astounded by the speed with which human engineers and scientists began reverse engineering captured hegemony technology and improving upon it in ways that the alien coalition's most advanced researchers had never considered possible. The breakthrough came when Dr. Nathan Pierce, a former quantum physicist who had been working with Elena Rodriguez's precursor research team, discovered that human neural patterns could interface not only with ancient alien technology, but also with the sophisticated AI systems that controlled hegemony weapon platforms, allowing human operators to literally reprogram enemy vessels during combat and turn the coalition's own advanced weaponry against them. Within weeks of this discovery, every major human fleet had been equipped with boarding teams led by neural interface specialists who could penetrate hegemony ships and convert them into human-controlled assets faster than the enemy could respond, transforming desperate defensive battles into stunning tactical victories that left coalition commanders struggling to understand how their technological superiority had been so completely neutralized. The psychological impact of watching their own ships turn against them proved devastating to hegemony morale, as the coalition's member species had been conditioned to believe that their technology was inherently superior to anything that younger civilizations could produce. But humanity's rapid adaptation and improvement of captured systems shattered that fundamental assumption and created panic throughout the alien command structure. Captain Ashley Morgan, who had emerged as one of the most effective neural interface operators despite the terrible physical cost of repeated connections to alien systems, led a series of daring raids that captured entire hegemony research facilities and allowed human scientists to access the coalition's most closely guarded technological secrets. The information they discovered revealed that the hegemony's apparent technological supremacy was actually built upon a foundation of stolen innovations from conquered civilizations, suggesting that the coalition's ruling species had long ago lost their own capacity for genuine innovation and had become dependent upon enslaving other races to maintain their military advantage. Lieutenant General Brandon Walsh, commanding the liberation forces in the Centauri sector, demonstrated the tactical applications of humanity's technological breakthrough when his combined human-alien fleet engaged a hegemony armada that outnumbered them 3-1, but emerged victorious after converting nearly half of the enemy vessels to their cause during the course of the battle itself. The engagement became known as the Miracle of Centauri, as human boarding parties led by Marine Colonel Jessica Roberts systematically captured enemy dreadnoughts and turned their reality-warping weapons against their former allies, creating a cascade effect that saw the entire hegemony force either destroyed or converted within 6 hours of the initial engagement. The victory demonstrated that humanity had not only achieved technological parity with their enemies, but had actually surpassed them by developing hybrid systems that combined precursor technology with captured hegemony innovations and human ingenuity to create weapons and defensive systems that were superior to anything either ancient civilization had produced independently. As news of these unprecedented victories spread throughout the galaxy, the momentum of the war began to shift decisively in favor of the liberation forces. But the hegemony's ruling council responded by withdrawing their scattered fleets to the Galactic core, where they prepared for a final confrontation that would determine the fate of every sentient species in known space. The Prime Architect, speaking for crystalline hierarchs, issued a galaxy-wide transmission declaring that if the coalition could not maintain control through conventional means, they would activate the Omega Protocol, a doomsday weapon built into Galactic core itself that would trigger a chain reaction capable of destroying every star system within 10,000 light-years rather than allow their empire to fall to what they contemptuously referred to as inferior biological specimens. Intelligence reports confirmed that the hegemony possessed the technological capability to carry out this threat, as their ancestors had built massive stellar engineering projects throughout the galactic core that could be weaponized to create a cascading supernova effect that would render entire sectors of the galaxy uninhabitable for millions of years. General David Hayes, coordinating the final assault from his command ship Indomitable Spirit, understood that humanity and their allies faced an enemy that had chosen extinction over defeat, making the upcoming battle for galactic core not just a military engagement, but a race against time to prevent the hegemony from destroying everything they had fought to liberate. The combined Liberation Fleet represented the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history, with over 5,000 ships from more than 100 different species united under human tactical coordination. But they would be facing the concentrated power of the hegemony's core worlds, where the coalition had spent centuries building defenses that incorporated reality-warping technology, on a scale that dwarfed anything previously encountered. As the Liberation Armada prepared for a hyperspace translation to the galactic core, Hayes knew that the next few hours would determine whether the galaxy would emerge from this conflict as a confederation of free civilizations or as a lifeless void where the hegemony's final act of spite had ensured that if they could not rule, no one would survive to inherit what they left behind, making this ultimate battle a test not just of military capability, but of whether hope and determination could triumph over the absolute corruption of power that had consumed the galaxy's former masters. Part 8 *. The final battle for the galactic core began with the largest hyperspace translation in recorded history as General David Hayes led the combined Liberation fleet of over 5,000 vessels from across the galaxy into the heart of hegemony space, where the coalition's desperate leaders had concentrated every remaining ship and defensive installation around a massive stellar engineering complex that housed the Omega Protocol doomsday weapon. Admiral Rebecca Torres commanded the human contingent from her flagship Defiance, the same vessel from which she had witnessed Earth's destruction months earlier, but now she sailed not as a refugee fleeing extinction, but as a leader of a multi-species armada that represented hope for every oppressed civilization in the galaxy. The hegemony's final fortress was a sight that defied comprehension, with artificial structures the size of small moons orbiting impossibly close to the galactic core's central black hole. Their reality warping shields creating distortions in space-time that made conventional sensors useless and forced the Liberation fleet to rely on the precursor-enhanced navigation systems that Dr. Elena Rodriguez's teams had developed specifically for this ultimate confrontation. As the two massive fleets closed the engagement range, the very fabric of space began to buckle under gravitational and exotic energy stresses generated by weapon systems that operated on principles beyond normal physics, creating a battlefield where the laws of reality themselves became weapons to be wielded by whoever possessed the knowledge and willed to bend them to their purpose. The hegemony's opening salvo was devastating in its scope and fury, as the coalition's remaining forces unleashed every weapon at their disposal in a desperate attempt to destroy the Liberation fleet before it could penetrate their defensive perimeter. But humanity's adaptive tactics and technological innovations allowed them to weather the storm of reality-warping energy that would have annihilated any conventional force. Captain Marcus Thompson, despite the permanent neurological damage from his previous encounters with precursor technology, insisted on leading the critical assault on the Omega Protocol's control systems, understanding that his unique experience with neural interfaces made him humanity's best hope for preventing the galactic genocide that the hegemony preferred over defeat. The battle raged across multiple dimensions simultaneously as human boarding parties fought their way through the twisted corridors of hegemony command ships, while Dr. Nathan Pierce and his team of neural interface specialists worked desperately to hack into the alien computer systems that controlled the doomsday weapon, racing against time as the coalition's leaders prepared to trigger the stellar cascade that would transform the galactic core into an expanding wave of destructive energy. The turning point came when Ambassador Lisa Carter, working with her network of alien allies, successfully convinced large portions of the hegemony's enslaved forces to turn against their masters at the crucial moment, as Vortak hive minds coordinated simultaneous uprisings on dozens of coalition vessels, while Karathi warriors led boarding actions that captured key defensive installations throughout the enemy fleet. Commander Jake Morrison, leading a combined human ethereal strike force, penetrated the heavily defended command complex where the crystalline hierarchs, the void-touched, and eternal throne had gathered for their final stand, and in the climactic confrontation that followed, humanity's greatest strength was not their weapons or their technology, but their ability to inspire other species to fight for something greater than mere survival. As the ancient rulers of the hegemony fell to the combined assault of the species they had enslaved for millennia, Captain Thompson successfully completed his neural interface with the Omega Protocol's control systems, using his uniquely human consciousness to rewrite the weapon's programming and transform it from an instrument of galactic destruction into a beacon that would help coordinate the restoration and rebuilding of the liberated worlds. In the aftermath of victory, as the remnants of the hegemony fleet surrendered or fled into the unknown regions beyond the galactic rim, humanity faced the enormous challenge of establishing a new galactic order that would prevent the rise of another tyrannical empire while respecting the autonomy and dignity of every member species. The solution came from humanity's greatest innovation, the the concept of cooperative leadership rather than domination, as Admiral Torres and her fellow human commanders work with representatives from hundreds of liberated civilizations to create the Galactic Confederation, a democratic alliance based on mutual aid, shared technology, and collective defense against any future threats to galactic freedom. Dr. Elena Rodriguez established the Precursor Heritage Foundation, dedicated to studying and preserving the ancient technology while ensuring that its power would never again be used for conquest or oppression, while General Hayes created the Confederation Defense Force, a multi-species military organization commanded by rotating leadership councils that prevented any single civilization from accumulating too much power. The former hegemony worlds were gradually integrated into the new Confederation through reconstruction programs that emphasize healing and reconciliation rather than revenge, as humanity demonstrated that true strength came not from the ability to destroy one's enemies, but from the wisdom to transform them into allies and partners in building a better future. As the years passed and the Galactic Confederation grew stronger and more prosperous, historians would look back on humanity's dark exodus from Earth as the beginning of a new era in galactic civilization, where the species that had once seemed destined for extinction had instead become the catalyst for the greatest liberation in cosmic history, proving that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the combination of human determination, adaptability, and compassion could overcome any force that sought to crush the spirit of freedom that burned in the hearts of all sentient beings throughout the galaxy.